If you were injured at a gym or a trampoline park, but you signed a waiver, do you have a case? This video is going to talk extensively about that situation, so stay tuned. If you or your child was injured at a gym or a trampoline park, but you know that you signed a waiver, do you still have a case? And unfortunately, you're probably not going to like my answer, which is it depends. It depends on a few different factors. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and maybe you can learn as to whether or not you should get an attorney involved to discuss whether or not you should pursue a claim. Waivers have been around for a long time in Georgia. And the initial intent of waivers was that, hey, there are certain activities that are just inherently dangerous. There's activities like, think of skiing, right? Skiing is just a dangerous activity. And so we don't want everyone who's ever broken their ankle or injured themselves while they're skiing to turn around and sue the business, because we'd have no ski resorts, we'd have no ski slopes, there'd be nowhere you could go because the situation is just inherently dangerous. Now, unfortunately, though, over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a trend to take this to the extreme, the other direction. And the idea being that everybody wants you to sign an arbitration agreement and say, hey, you are not allowed to sue us if something happens. And so you've seen these situations where it started with these inherently dangerous activities and is now turned into a situation where even not so dangerous activities are requiring waivers. So what does that mean for you? Well, unfortunately, Georgia has very strong waiver laws. Georgia is a very pro-business state. And so most courts have given pretty strong deference or have upheld the legitimacy of these waivers, even in situations that I think they should not have. Even in situations where it seems like the public policy involved is one that we should not have waivers for somebody who's, for example, riding a train at the mall, right? I mean, that train should be safe for children. There shouldn't be a waiver in those situations. And so things like that, but the government has upheld them. So what can you do if you're injured at a gym or a trampoline park and you signed a waiver? Do you have a case? Waivers in Georgia are not allowed to waive what's called gross negligence. Now, what is gross negligence? Gross negligence is basically negligent that is so far beyond what would be acceptable behavior that it should not be allowed to be waived by a waiver. And so even if the waiver is valid, and sometimes they're not, we're going to talk a little bit about that, but even if the waiver is valid, the waiver typically cannot waive for gross negligence. So if the facility does something that's so negligent, then the waiver's not going to typically hold up in that situation. And so whether or not it's gross negligence is going to depend on a lot of things, but I think you can kind of understand what the difference between a negligent act is and a gross negligent act. Think something like if you're at a gym and maybe the weights are left on the rack and you go to pull them off and you hurt yourself. That might be negligence. But let's say maybe the weights or the plates are cracked and falling apart, and it's evident that they're rusted and they've been there for a long time, and then you go to lift the weight and it breaks and falls on your foot. Well, you probably have a pretty strong argument that that's gross negligence, right? That the facility has been using these rusted, these deteriorated and unsafe plates for a long time in the gym, and they should have been replaced. And so you can kind of see that difference between regular negligence and gross negligence. And so those are a major determination as to whether or not a waiver is valid. Now, but what if you have a situation where it's just negligence and maybe it's not gross negligence? Well, I still would talk to an experienced lawyer, because many times these facilities, these gyms, these trampoline parks, these go-kart tracks, they don't do a very good job in drafting their waivers. And waivers have specific requirements that must be met in order to be enforceable. Just like in some contracts, you have to have certain language or certain requirements or certain things in order to be enforceable. And so these waivers are the same way. there's certain language, there's certain requirements, and there's certain things under Georgia law that can render them completely invalid. And you'd be surprised at how many of these facilities and gyms don't hire a lawyer and don't actually go through the process that they need to make sure that their waiver is valid and enforceable. And so our law firm has been able to defeat dozens of waivers over my career where the actions that were taken by the facility were not proper. There was language missing in the waiver, and it rendered it completely unenforceable. Therefore, my client could bring a case. And so the only way for you to know for sure whether or not you have a case, even if you signed a waiver or if you signed a waiver for your child, is to call a lawyer, let them review that waiver, and give you their legal opinion. Again, my firm's done dozens of these over my career. We've looked at dozens of waivers. Some were enforceable and we had to pursue gross negligence, and some were completely unenforceable. And so if I can review the waiver, or if you have a question, we'd love to give free consultations. I'd be more than happy to talk to you and learn a little more about the injury, the situation, whether or not it is, we believe it's negligence or gross negligence, and also whether or not that waiver itself is enforceable. And so give us a call. What do you have to lose? We could definitely review it and give you our legal opinion. But even if you don't hire us, definitely hire someone who understands these cases, who's successful with these cases, and can give you a valid legal opinion. If you like getting these updates and learning a little more about Georgia law, I would definitely encourage you to like and subscribe. But until next time, stay safe out there, and thanks for watching.